So, welcome back to another episode of the segment and continuing with our unofficial theme of season three of bringing you guests that provide essential, but probably not often enough heard perspectives on cyber. It is our great pleasure to welcome to the podcast today Dr. Kelley Misata, PhD. She's the founder and CEO of Sightline Security, a nonprofit organization that helps other nonprofits integrate cybersecurity into their daily operations. And she comes with a wealth of knowledge and experience. So, Kelley, welcome to the segment. It's wonderful to have you here.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, on sort of just that general theme about sort of the background, I do feel that particularly long-lasting careers in cyber require the individual to be very mission-driven. So, how would you describe your mission and what motivates you in your career in cyber?
Yeah, okay. I really love that question. That's the first time it's been asked in that frame, so thank you
Yes.
for that. I It draws me to this conversation that I had with a dear friend of mine who's been in the security space for much longer than I am, and she said to me, she said, "Kelley, you just get so excited all the time about everything." And I said, "I do. Like I genuinely feel like we have an opportunity to make a difference in the world when it
Mm,
comes to helping organizations, individuals, groups of people embrace cybersecurity with a lot more confidence,
mm,
and taking down all those layers of mystery and flying unicorns and fairy dust. And I think that's what drives me every day is that I see that possibility
mm,
in all the different corners of my work. And I generally get up in the morning going, wow, what exciting thing is going to kind of come my
mm.
way today? Whether I learn something new, help someone think differently, engage on a work group that, is trying to make the world a better place. It really is a journey every single morning.
Amazing, because one of the things, and I've heard you mention this on other interviews and podcasts you've been given, is really you kind of challenge the way security is portrayed or represented within organizations as a and I think your critique of it is that it's often seen as a siloed function, whereas really you want that to sort of essentially permeate across the organization. Can you talk a bit more about this and like in your ideal state, how security would be organized?
Yeah, we are interacting with this technology every single day, and even more so, right? Like, think back. I remember the days of interoffice mail. Do you
Mm.
remember those days
Yeah,
with the
I do.
envelopes,
Yep.
right? And you would talk about PII. It's like you cross off someone's name. It's like, ooh, that just went to the president, then went to HR. Who's getting
Yeah.
fired, right? But like I think back a lot to we have adopted technology with such abandonment around how
Mm,
do we stay safe. And my dream state is that we are always thinking about, should I be doing this? What is the
mm,
impact of my behavior? What is my impact of engaging with a new piece of software? What's my impact to my organization if I choose to take this direction in a product development model?
mm,
It really makes us, my dream is that we're going to step back and we're going to say, huh, maybe we should think again about it. So it's
mm.
almost taking that pause instead of it being like, oh gosh, we've got to go talk to the security team. And we really don't want to talk to the security
Yeah.
team because they're going to get in the way of progress in our organization, right? Or they're going to scare us, even
Yeah.
worse. Having it just be muscle memory for organizations and individuals to me is the dream state. And I think we're moving there almost unconsciously,
Hmm.
but it's taking a long time. And I think folks in the security space are impatient when it
Mm.
comes to that. And I hope that maybe I bring a little bit of patience to the conversation to say, it's okay. We've made progress. Let's just
Yeah.
keep going.
I love the way that you phrase that, particularly the part about the security people or the security practitioners are impatient. So let's kind of hold that thought. We're going to come back to that in a second, but just on the broader theme of what you said, um, because I feel that if we now put this into the context of security awareness training, and very much is around sort of like don't click this, be aware of this, and so on. But I think you put a much more personal spin on it, where it's about, let me think about the consequences of this action versus a fear mongering. So you're putting a lot more of the ownership, but also the engagement on the individual. That I think
Right.
that's a really great way to sort of present it.
Uh-oh, there was a pause.
Okay. Did no problem, no problem. That no problem. Okay. So I absolutely love how you framed the security practitioners are impatient, and really what we need is more patience. But and we'll come on to that in a second. But I want to take a further step back to something about what you said is about how if every individual is encouraged to approach any decision as, how does this contribute to the security of my data, my organization? Um, then we're going to get a whole better security culture than what we have today around security being very much the gatekeepers or the barriers to progress. So, do you think there's an opportunity to modify how we do security awareness training to incorporate lot more of this personal ownership?
Oh, absolutely. I think it has to go down into the cultural level, and that's hard, right? Because one of the most difficult things in security are the people.
Hmm.
We're the messiest, most complicated element. So when we talk about security awareness training, we're not saying awareness training on the systems, we're saying the people. So
Yeah.
you're automatically talking about the most complicated, pain in the neck kind of thing you have to deal with in security. So you've got to take it maybe outside of that special box
Hmm.
of let's do a training and make it, wow, let's just talk about how we're using these systems and these
Hmm.
devices. Let's talk about the what ifs and the impacts to our organization. I mean, a really interesting case in point that I think about, and you know, my perspective is a little bit unique, I think, is that I think about even if I post something on my personal social media, I think about the impact of that to the people who might
Hmm.
be receiving it, or if I take a photograph, you know, I'm very, very protective of people's images because I don't know what they have going on in their
Yeah.
lives. So I don't want to just be like, hey, here, me and a bunch of strangers behind me.
Yeah.
So it's about thinking deeper to that, but it's also that consideration of I'm using this technology. I have people around me, I have systems around me. What's the risk? Not just to me,
Mm.
but to all the tentacles that are connected to me. And it sounds overwhelming, but if it just sort of becomes part of muscle memory, because
Yeah.
we're already doing in some cases, I mean, you probably remember, like I do, your first password ever,
Yes. Yes.
right? It
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like I don't even want to say what it was, but everybody can guess. But now, if you were to say that even to my 82-year-old mother, and she loves that I say her age on podcasts because I'm like, you're 82. But even she doesn't do that anymore. And she didn't do any cybersecurity awareness
Yeah.
training. She
Yeah.
was just caught up in the culture of her life and the systems that she's using to force her
Mm.
to do her to behave differently. To me, that's the sweet spot. But again, it takes patience. It takes future thinking. It takes patience. It takes stepping back and saying, ah, didn't get that right. Let's pivot over to this
Mm.
way of doing it.
And I think that example you gave of your of your mother, and thank you to her, right? Of being able to, it's something about being able to connect the action you're taking to sort of something you're able to relate to in real
Right,
life, right? Which
right,
makes the association makes the reason behind it, again, like the motivation, the mission behind it, so much more powerful. And I agree, right? I think that there's probably a significant opportunity to reframe how we do security awareness training with that approach at its center. Is about how
right.
do you make it as easily relatable as possible versus sort of the abstraction. But let's come on to the patient's comment, because you mentioned it again here. So you and I, we work in with security practitioners. We're in the industry. Why are we impatient?
Oh, it's because we're constantly thinking about where are the bad guys? Where's the
Mm,
threat? Where's the next terrible thing that's going to hit someone? I think about it all the time. And I've watched people early in my journey of the security space. I was watching people fatiguing out um, back then, and I kept thinking, but why? And it
mm,
wasn't until I was in it for a bit longer, as well as my own journey into security, that I realized that the more you're thinking about um, what bad thing is going to happen next, the more exhausted you will feel mentally and physically. And I think that's where the impatience comes from.
mm,
And I also think security folks see the world through a different lens. You know, we are conditioned and trained to look at these devices and these systems through a different lens. And so for us, it's natural. Like I remember when I was at the Tor project and I would watch developers interacting with journalists in compromised parts of the world, and they would really start to lose their minds. They're like, why don't they just get it?
mm.
And I kept saying to them, they can't see it.
Yeah,
It's all a mystery. So
yeah,
if we can help them see it. So I built a training using, do you remember those black lights, those pens that you used to have as a kid and
yeah,
you'd give
yeah,
your best friend, right?
yeah,
So I bought a bunch of those and I brought into this training these envelopes.
yeah. Hmm.
And then I had people in the audience volunteer to be the nodes. And I took the message and I wrote it in the black light, right? Because that's a little bit like PGP. It's like, okay, I'm going to encrypt this, put it in the three envelopes,
Yeah.
hop it around, and they literally, in a physical way, experienced how Tor operated.
Mm,
And at the end of that, that was the first time that a group of people, well, that I saw, stepped back and said, ah, now I know why Tor is slow. I'm like, yes, yes, because it's making all of these hops around. But it
yeah.
really was for them that, oh, now I see where the bad guys are. Now I see where the systems are. Now I
Mm,
see how this works. You can't do that with everything in security, but we can do better at
yeah.
it. We can
Uh,
stop sort of presenting everything as magical.
yes, yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad you talked through the tour example with the envelopes, because I was reading a transcript of a I think on IBM Security Intelligence. You did a recording with them a while ago, and I read this and I thought, because I could, for some reason I couldn't actually access the audio. Like, I'm not really sure how she sort of manifests that envelope example, but now I absolutely get it. So thank you for that. Um,
Yeah,
yes, and I think yes we do. Again, right? It again sort of it's tied to that previous piece we were talking about regarding awareness, which is how as security practitioners, I think we need to make it sound less magical, right?
yeah,
It's like really being able to put it into the context of, and there's a lot of talk today about, right, security principles in the context of business outcomes. And I think that there's a lot to do there, but also I think it is definitely demystifying cyber in general, is because there's so much around. It's like you get so much brilliant engineers, brilliant folks who work in IT and risk, etc. But I don't get cyber. So
right.
there's a huge opportunity there. I agree. So connecting this now to some of the work that you're doing today. right? And I'd love for you to just quickly, because I'm sure the audience are probably not overly familiar with what Sightline does and what your role there is. So before we delve into that, which is a fascinating area, give us a quick sort of overview of the Sightline.
Yeah. So Sightline Security is a nonprofit based here in the United States that I built out of my dissertation research. And I have to give credit to Becky Bass, who was one of my mentors back in that time period. I It was built because I started a PhD program after being stalked for many years, decide to go and earn the PhD as a way of understanding how my attacker could do what he was doing. And when I got to dissertation, which by the way, I thought they were kicking me out at every single every
Hmm.
semester, I was like, oh, that was fun. I'll wait to see when they're going to say thank you very much. See you later. So I got to dissertation. I was like, what do I do? Like, it was such a daunting thing. And I stepped back into that space of, oh, I used to do TQM back in the day. I
Hmm.
was a Baldrige Award assessor for a little bit. So I knew how to do assessments. And so I did my dissertation on a gap analysis of looking at cybersecurity preparedness with organizations working with victims of violence. I
Hmm.
wanted the whole nonprofit space, and my PhD committee said, yeah, get the PhD first, then go save the world. But the long and short of it is that the thing that experience illuminated for me was that nonprofits were given all of this free stuff from different places,
Hmm.
but nobody was helping them step back and say, what do I need? And
Hmm.
why do I need it? And what's the value to my
Hmm.
business? And so that's where Sightline came to be because unbelievably so, I was sitting preparing for my defense for my dissertation. Becky came into the room, surprised me, drove from Mobile, Alabama to West
Hmm.
Lafayette to surprise me. And at the end of my defense, she said, you have to do something with this way of thinking that you've built around this research, and that has become Sightline. So our lane really is to help nonprofits figure out where they are. And
Hmm.
it's for us, it's about taking the controls that exist in the security space, CSF, CIS controls,
Hmm.
and repurposing them into nonprofit language. But the only way to do that is to spend a lot of time listening to these organizations. And so it's really sitting on the fence between the security space and the nonprofit space so that we can help those nonprofits figure out where they're at.
Fascinating. And like you spoke about sort of the background about how like sort of the personal experience that essentially motivated you to explore this area in your PhD. Would you mind talking a bit about that experience, if you don't
Yeah,
mind sharing?
yeah, I think it for me it frames even today where I see security and sort of how I see this whole space.
Uh-huh.
I started my career very much like most people do, just kind of taking the first job. But I elevated to doing a lot of business development. I have an
Hmm.
MBA in marketing, which is also really weird because I have a PhD in cybersecurity and an MBA in marketing. Um,
It's
but
the right way around. That's the right way around.
exactly. And it's been but I was working for a large company, and one of my work colleagues kind of barnacled himself to me in a way that was not friendly and not good. And it went on for the better part of 7 years.
Wow.
And I really I got to security because I just kept reaching out for help,
Hmm.
because I kept thinking, like, how can it that this one person 3,000 miles away could not only disrupt my life, but he kept reaching out to people connected to
Mm,
me. And so I was getting like bee stings because I'd get all these emails from people in my life.
mm,
Lots of relationships completely obliterated by this situation, and lots of fear. So I was experiencing this heightened level of fear, but so were family members of mine
Mm,
and others. And I remember going to the Tor project because he was using Tor, and I remember calling Andrew Lumen and saying, "You've got to help me,"
mm,
because the FBI and other law enforcement agencies said we can't help you. He's
mm,
using Tor, and it baffled me how a piece of technology could protect
mm,
the bad guys and leave the burden of
mm.
evidence on the good guys, right?
Yeah.
So at all these different junctures, I was like, how is it that that's winning? And it was a little bit of him winning, but was more the technology was winning.
Mm,
And I kept thinking, this can't be the way security works. It just can't be. So I luckily met Dr. Eugene Spafford,
mhm,
um, and kind of attribute him to saving me in the direction of my life. And he said to me, "Hey, why don't you apply to this PhD program at Purdue?" And I'm like, "Yeah, right. You want a single mom living in Boston in her 40s with an MBA in marketing to join a PhD program in cybersecurity? You've got to be out of your mind." So, yeah, I did it. I wrote the application on Amelia Earhart, went into it thinking I just wanted to grab as much information as I
mhm,
could to be able to understand how he could do what he was doing and how others, couldn't help me along the
mm,
way. And so that is completely framed how I approach security because that beginner's mind that I lived in for all those years. I mean, I remember calling a friend of mine back in the day, Marcus Raynham, and I called Marcus. We had gotten introduced by some other mutual friends, and I said, "Help me understand how a firewall works. You
mm,
literally are like one of the pioneers in this technology." And he was like, "I don't have time for that." In typical Marcus fashion, right? Like that's his personality. Good-hearted guy, but that was his personality, and that was part of my entree into the security space of wow, there's all these smart people
mm,
who I don't want to say unwillingly, but didn't have that patience to
mm.
step in and say, "Let me break it down for you so that you can understand how this connects to what you're experiencing." So that's what I carry with me
That's.
everywhere I go.
I mean, thank you so much for sharing it, and I think that tying it back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, it's like very easy to understand sort of your mission, right, and how that experience now ties to what you've done and what you are doing today. So thank you so much for sharing that. So let's talk about Sightline, and let's talk about sort of nonprofits. And as you were covering that, sort of just the intro on Sightline, what you spoke about was you sort of um, it's helping nonprofits understand what they need to do in cyber.
Right.
And you spoke about sort of mapping to things like CSF, etc., and other frameworks, and translate that into requirements that represent them. So help us understand that a bit more, because when I look at sort of CSF, I see kind of requirements that are relevant to everyone. I don't see a lens of private sector versus public sector versus non-profit when I
Yeah.
read it, right? But clearly there is a difference. So I'd love to understand that.
Yeah, it's been such an interesting journey and it's actually continuing, which is really fun as we continue our work at Sightline is that there's never this moment where I'm like, "Oh, that's it. We got it." So a really interesting case in point is that the verbiage in the NIST as logical as it seems to most people, if you take that and you put it into a mission-based organization, they're going to immediately go into it with the mindset of, oh, it's cybersecurity, it's complicated,
Mhm.
right? So you got to break down that whole barrier. Um, the other thing is the language. So the first time I asked a nonprofit, "Do you have an inventory of your hardware and software?" They came back and said, "What do you mean by inventory?" Right? And for for anybody, you're like, well, do you have a list?
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
you have a list? But again, it was that moment where I was like, okay, so they're thinking it's something like some system or some application that they have to be able to grab things. And then as soon as I started talking about assets, that was a
Mm,
whole kettle of fish, like way off in the corner. This didn't even go down into the bowels of these control families that talk about detection,
mm,
response, firewalls, intrusion detection,
mm,
like all of logs. You know, a nonprofit's not going to understand what a log is.
mm,
Okay. So it was stepping out of the security space and stepping into their world to say, what is it that I can do to help them see where security connects to their
mm,
mission? And the first thing that I started doing when I was setting up Sightline was that I would do these onboarding calls with our members. And I said to them, cybersecurity is a marketing term. Let's not talk about it. And they're like, okay, your whole website says cybersecurity all over it. I said, but let me help you break it down. Information security is securing of information, like a phone number,
mhm,
photograph, name, whatever, right? You can put your hands on that. And they're like, yes. Cybersecurity, securing of a space. La. We can't control that. That's the
mhm.
domain. But if you focus on the what, then they stepped in. They're like, oh, well, we've got, donor database sitting over here.
Yeah.
We should
Yeah.
probably think about, securing that. That's the moment that these organizations are stepping in and saying,
Yeah.
ah, okay. The second shift was taking away all the scary stuff because they're
Mm,
already scared. They read the
mm.
news, new advancements in technology like AI and machine learning. They're like, oh God, the robots are going to take over the world. The moment that I was able to sort of step back and say, hey, did you know that if you do some simple things and you can tell stories around it, your donors might actually see that you care
Mm,
about the information that they're sharing with you to
mm,
help your mission? Won't that be a lovely story to say to them? And they immediately were like, oh, yeah, let's tell some stories around that. Then it's a different frame of thinking about how to present the business. And all of these combined were really about us going in and saying, I don't know your business.
mm,
I might know cybersecurity and I know the control families inside and out. I don't know your business. So
mm,
at Sightline, my dream is to not just have cybersecurity for nonprofits. I want to understand security by mission.
mm.
I want to understand what's the difference between a human trafficking organization versus a food bank,
Yeah.
versus the Red Cross versus my local uh, pet shelter here in my
Yeah.
town. Like there's all these layers. So at Sightline, it's very much my mission to stop saying, hey, 2 point whatever million nonprofits in the US alone, you're all the same. So we're going
Yeah.
to give you the all the same help and we're going to assume that you have all the same problems.
Yeah.
I want to break all of that down and say, we could do better.
I love that because I think storytelling is so important now in cyber, right? To really um get progress, and I think this applies to organizations of any size, of any complexity, being able to tell effective stories about why cyber is important to almost each individual part of an organization is essential to get buy-in. And I think that applies even more so where there is going back to sort of something that you said right at the beginning, where there's potentially a very large distance between the individuals who are sort of carrying out the organization's mission and their IT or cybersecurity function. So I think that's really important. I think this is kind of where sort of the reason it puts you in the best place: marketing MBA, cybersecurity PhD, right? Sort of really coming together to in that in that perfect storm. But yes, I sort of completely agree. And I think there's something else that you have said in the past is that about the nonprofit sector, about a common misconception is that we look at nonprofit meaning, oh, right, they're just dependent on hand me downs, right?
Right.
And they don't have resource, they don't have expertise, they don't have money. But what you've expressed is that no, that the problem often is that, particularly if you look at some of the larger nonprofits, is that in fact they're quite well resourced and they're quite well funded and they've got access to everything, but
Yes.
they don't necessarily know how to stitch it all together, and that's where they need help.
Correct. And there's that context of
Yeah,
why does this matter? You know, if you ask anybody, and I can't wait for RSA because I'm gonna I usually walk around the exhibit floor outside the talks and I'll meet up with friends or colleagues. I'll be like, so hey, what's your thought on the nonprofit space right now? And I get
yeah,
the usual stuff. They're poor, they don't know cybersecurity,
yeah,
you know, the laundry list. I'm like, yep, nope. Let
yeah,
me tell you, they have money, but
yeah.
they have to explain how they use that money
Mm,
differently. Because if you look at the business structure, right, it's different than enterprise. So again, it's taking us as security professionals out of, oh, I just have to figure out how to get them to meet the controls of the NIST CSF, and
yeah.
more of, gosh, I wonder how they make decisions about money.
Mm,
Once you understand that, then you can approach the security investment question differently.
yeah.
So it's about not going in and saying, "Oh yeah, you guys are all kind of hosed here, and you're all the same," because they're not. And
Mm,
honestly, one of the common themes that I absolutely love, that I've gained from this work that just it seriously warms my heart, is that these organizations will always put mission first.
yeah,
Always.
yeah,
Whether it is a domestic violence shelter, that I spoke to, I remember early in my research for my PhD, and this dear friend of mine was sitting on my porch, and I said, "Hey," I said, "I'm going to be doing this thing, and what do you think? And I have a survey, and it's going to be great." And she's like, "Kelley, I have 100,000 hits on my website every day from all parts of the world. I can't think about that because I've
mm,
got a family that needs a place to sleep tonight."
yeah,
She's like, "That's all that matters to me."
yeah.
So, again, going back to sort of how security professionals really want to help, want to bring that urgency into the organizations, the more that we can just step back and say, "Oh, I didn't think of it that way.
Yeah.
What can I do to help just even be like, put my finger in the dam to make sure
Mm,
that you don't like collapse," kind of
yeah.
thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a powerful image to have in the head, have in the mind, because again, tying it back, sort of this what seems to be a bit of a theme in our conversation today is about that mission driven, right, and
Yeah,
about aligning it to the mission, and I kind of drawing probably a crude parallel to, let's say, the for profit sector, to the private sector, where like I often say that everyone cares about security till you cause an outage on the key revenue generating application, at which point no one cares about security. And it's all about, when is this thing going to be back online? Because every
yeah,
second it's offline, I am losing X thousand dollars or whatever it may be. And in the nonprofit sector, the impact of that is often a human impact, right? And as you
definitely.
just described, and we have to be mindful of that. How do we better secure this without in any way compromising the mission?
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen examples of members in our community that were hit by a ransomware attack. I won't name the attack, it was pretty famous. That prevented them from being able to provide lunches to children, for like weeks, not just a couple of days. But you're talking about families and children
Yeah,
that rely on that support to get through their weeks. Um, and it's not always about like just these, I don't want to say sad stories, but the thing about nonprofits is that they're there when everything goes sideways,
Yeah.
whether it be fires in LA or a blood drive because someone locally needs a transfusion or someone's having a really,
Mm,
really tough time and they call a suicide hotline. These nonprofits, they are there when we need them.
mm,
And yet we're sort of putting them off to the side and saying, well, they're not our go-to market.
yeah.
Or yeah, they don't have any money, or they're not going to get it, or it's going to take me a lot of time. That it's hard for a lot of security professionals, I think, to step in. And I think where they over rotate, and I've seen this too, and it kind of drives me a little crazy. I'm like, they're like, hey, I've got cybersecurity in my blood. I'm going to go volunteer and go like help them. And my immediate reaction is always like, please don't. Please, please don't go like in like a superhero and be like, I'm
Mm,
going to sit on the board. I'm going to like help you do everything. I just want them to step back and say, wow, so how do you operate? Like,
yeah.
what's this? Like,
Yeah.
go in with a lot of humility, and you can make a lot more progress. Because I think also these organizations look at our field as this space of superheroes, and if one of them knocks on the door, of course they're going to be like, "Come on in, fix
Mm,
us,"
mm,
because we're scared, we're
yeah.
busy, we're scared. You are a superhero, so you're going to come in and fix us. That is a super dangerous combination.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, again, right, just trying to draw some parallels with what I've seen is that often I think whether it's as security professionals or as vendors, we're um, very quick to jump in with here's all the amazing things we do, or here's my set of super skills, right? And we never think actually the first question I should ask is what do you do? What do you care about? Tell me like what are your problems? And almost reframing the conversation in that way would make for such a more powerful engagement. Is that what you find?
Exactly. Exactly. For me, when I'm working with these organizations, and actually most things in security still, I still feel like I'm that PhD student the
Mm.
first semester, at Purdue and going, all right, like, what's cryptography? Like, what are elliptic curves? By the way, they made me cry. Um, and I remember I did a keynote, and Martin Hellman of the Diffie Hellman Exchange was the keynote in the morning. We met each other in the green room, and I went up to him. I said, "Hello, I'm Kelley Misata," and he knows Spath. And I just kind of did a little this on his arm. He's like, "What's that for?" I'm like, "Your stuff makes me cry. I just want to tell you." but but it really is like we are making these things so complicated.
Yeah.
And so when you can go into something, whether it's your area of expertise or not, if you go into it with that beginner's mind,
Mm.
and you don't have to, I hate the sort of term dumbing things down. It's not
Yeah.
dumbing it's down. It's being curious. It
Yes.
is saying, hey, I've never done that before. I have no idea what it takes to run an animal shelter, not
Yeah.
even a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you do that. That's huge.
Yeah.
And then if you have those conversations using their words, knowing their business,
Yeah.
it's hugely powerful. I have a story. You want to hear it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is one of those humbling stories. So I was working with one of our members. They just finished their Kickstart, which is our way to get them kind of
Hmm.
started on their security journey. And I do a lot of research on the outside. I look at all their websites and
Hmm.
their social media. And so this organization helps survivors of suicide. And they have a forum, and the forum is widely popular. And I remember going on and going, oh, like the security person in me just was like screaming, going,
Mm.
oh my God, oh my God. Like I remember, I remember going in, going, oh, geez, Louise, what are we going to do? Like I really, and I remember like finding myself kind of going down that rabbit hole and going, okay, shoot. I'm going to have to talk to these people, right? And I resisted the urge of calling them immediately. Waited for their outcomes presentation. I'm sitting there. I'm like, oh, I get to the presentation around this particular platform. And I said, I have some concerns. Like I said, just like that. And the woman who founded the organization stopped me in my tracks. And she said, Kelley, I think I know what you're going to say, but let me talk to you. Let me share with you why our platform is open. She said, people who have had someone in their lives commit suicide are in a headspace that is wrought with questions and grief and stress and uncertainty and trust issues and all this stuff is going on. She said these people need a space where they can just sit and watch and kind of get a feel for what's going on and a feel for the conversations and this. And she's like, and sometimes they hang out there for a while. And when they're comfortable, they come in, but not until they're comfortable. And she said, this is what our community needs. And it was such a like, what the fudge? I should have known. Like, I should have thought about it. But because I don't live in that world day in and day out, how would I understand how those people that they serve are navigating sort of this space to reach out for help? And so I said, oh my gosh, let's think about some creative ways that maybe we can do a little bit more without shifting the essence and the need for this platform to operate this way. So, and she got that. She was like, yeah, if you have suggestions, we get it, we understand it, but we're putting mission first.
Yeah.
But it was hugely humbling. And I love
That's
her for it. I love that she felt comfortable saying that to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a that there is so much to take from what you just described, because again, it's as you said, right? It's that humbling thing about when you spend that time to understand why someone or an organization is operating in a particular way, right? You then kind of it puts that context that
Yeah.
you didn't have, and where like it's otherwise it's kind of your 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 expertise trying to lead the way, like, oh, I know how to fix this, right? Versus there's probably a good reason why you did this, so tell me about it.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Before we move on to the next thing, I think just the last thing about the um about sort of not just the organizations you support, but also the who they serve. And you described various scenarios about like that these are the organizations that in a crisis they are the first port of call. But also I think a part of your work, it's probably um, doesn't go sort of ignored, that often those the victims are also the ones that the attackers are trying to target at that very time because they know they're the most vulnerable. So
Yeah.
you must be sort of you yourself and of the organizations you work with are probably juggling all of these challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. That's where understanding the mission of the organization really comes into play
Mm,
because it helps you step into it again, not telling them what to do, but listening for different things. So when I was working on dissertation, I was working with organizations supporting victims of human trafficking. That's a very different security mindset to have because not only are those victims targets, but the organizations supporting them are also targets.
yeah.
And one of them was doing this like hackathon. I won't give you the details because it scared the bejesus out of me. But they were doing a hackathon, and then I said to them, I said, "So what are you guys doing to harden your systems?" And they're like, "What?" Like the big eyes. I'm like, well, you're promoting this hackathon. And they're like, yeah, all over Facebook and Twitter and everything. I'm like, oh, the bad guys read that stuff too. And they were like, immediately went, oh, shoot. But it is, it's stepping in and really understanding like who would want to come after them? Like I've worked with nonprofits that are, from a political side, their mission is very controversial.
Yeah.
I've worked with organizations that, because they're using numerous third party tools, some of them so legacy that's kind of ridiculous that they still exist, that you're like, oh gosh, what are you what are you doing? We've got to harden you. And they're like, yeah, but who's
Mm.
going to come get us?
Yeah.
We're just, and that's the part of the mindset that we also try and shift them out of is, I had one executive director on the call and she's like, come on. She's like, bad guys, I know you're listening anyway. You can come get us. And I'm like, oh, don't do that. Not that that's going to happen, but like just her mindset of like, we don't have anything. You won't get anything out of us. I was like, well, yeah, okay, great. But it's again, I think that's one of the challenges that Sightline has always faced, since I started, is that we are. Someone told me we're very white glove and we're very
Mm.
nuanced, and yet the information that I've gathered over these years is just incredible. And it's helped me to see security in such a different way because it's not, there are some things we can do that will blanket a
Yeah.
lot of people. I mean, MFA, hello, thank you very much. Great. But there's so many things in the security space that don't fit
Yeah.
everybody at the same level. So we should think about where those opportunities exist.
Uh, I think the glove analogy is absolutely spot on, and I think it's cyber. As much as we want to generalize, we need to remember that ultimately the only way we'll be successful is taking that white glove approach to every problem that we try and solve. So moving on, and in sort of in this last part, you talked about sort of their use of sort of third party software, etc. Right. So you spend your other passion or area of expertise and passion is open source.
Yes.
And open source, I think, is now getting a huge amount of focus from a cyber perspective, particularly because of the sort of how much like third party risks, supply chain attacks, etc., are so much sort of like the term of the day at the moment. So let's start with open source security, big picture. Like, what are the challenges? What are we looking to address? What are the priorities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's probably a whole nother segment
I know, and I'm
on the
thinking
segment.
about how do we squeeze as much as possible into this in something that will probably could deal with an entire season of itself.
Yeah.
So,
It's
yeah.
Well, I think, not to plug my RSA talk, but I am going to be talking about this at RSA. I think, there's still kind of like nonprofits, there's still a lot of mystery around it, right? In the nonprofit place, everybody assumes things. In the open source space, it's the same kind of
Mm,
mindset. People think about it as a bunch of typically guys, in their black hoodies sitting in a basement someplace on GitHub, like doing stuff, right? They don't think about the big parameter of what the open source space has been. And I've been lucky to be serving as president of the Open Information Security Foundation,
mm,
for 12 years. And Suricata is, a huge part of the network security, space. And we have Suricatas in places you can't even imagine around the
mm,
world. But the reason why OISF and Suricata and sort of that model of open source works is because we're looking at from a multidimensional perspective. So, it's not just a bunch of people who like each other hanging out. It's
mm,
actually a business model. And if you step into looking at open source as a third party vendor, the way
mm.
you would an enterprise vendor, then all of a sudden the adoption and the use of it in these larger organizations shifts,
Mm.
because then you have to think about of, oh, what happens if that project implodes,
Yeah.
or what happens if the roadmap stops innovating,
Mm.
Um, you know, what about the governance? Where are they getting their money? Are they paying anybody? Who are the contributors? Like,
Mm,
it starts to open up all those complexities. And that's what I love about the open source space right now and into the future is that it's not going to get simpler, it's going to get more complex. But we have this sweet opportunity to step back and say, how do we reframe our thinking
mhm,
about what open source is? Does it still have all those community aspects? Absolutely.
mhm,
My my favorite thing and the thing I hate the most is our conference,
mm.
SurreyCon. We run SurreyCon every year. I hate building conferences. Sorry, everybody who's listening. It's not my lane. But the second I get on stage and I see the faces of these community members that
Yeah.
I've seen for 10 years still showing up, still contributing, that's what propels me
Mm,
and propels my team to continue on is that we know that it has a place in the world. Not all projects have that. So, making those key decisions from a supply chain perspective when you're using open source, you've got to open your eyes. You've got to look at it from all these different dimensions. You have to think about it around
mhm.
supply chain risks just like you would anything else. And stop thinking about it as this like, oh, we're going to be sitting around the campfire singing songs
Mm.
and on our laptops. And trust me, my early days in Tor, I'll never forget. I had the Tor developers were in Boston for a meeting, and I invited everybody over for a lasagna dinner because that's what I do. And and I remember like a whole bunch of them just kind of squatted in the living room. And my daughters who were in middle school at the time were like, "Mom, I don't think they're leaving. They're all getting really comfortable here in the living room." And I said, "That's okay. I'll just tell them to leave when it's time."
That's really funny. Well, I hope whenever I get a chance to visit Boston, you'll treat me to a vegetarian lasagna. Um,
Absolutely.
the so, but you said treating sort of the open source project as a like as a third party vendor, right? But I am simplifying a lot here as well because I acknowledge my understanding of the spaces is limited. But okay, you say treated them as a third party vendor, but if I'm doing if I'm doing some compliance checklist, right? And if it's a third party vendor with whom I have a contract, I can send them their part of the checklist and I say I'll fill it out and send it back to me and I'll assess it. How do you do that with an open source project? Like who answers the questionnaire? Like I think that's isn't that the challenge that the organization thinks I don't really know how to manage this risk, how to manage this exposure.
Well, that's where it comes from the first decision of who in your organization is making the choice to use that software, right? It's that pause that we talked
Mm,
about at the beginning of the program that, and I've seen users a lot of times will start using Suricata as an example and say, oh, maybe we need to start thinking about licenses and maybe we need to start thinking about these things, compliance. And
mm,
it's not until after those moments that they come knocking on our door. But for a lot of projects, they don't have that infrastructure. They don't have those channels to be able to ask those questions, whether it's an open source software that is tied to a commercial company
mm,
or whether that is an open source project that maybe has dissolved a bit or doesn't have those key contributors anymore. But it really does, and it's hard because that's, I think for some of the diehards in the open source space, the beauty is just to go in and play with something and check it
yeah,
out and see
yeah,
if it works, right? Great. Don't stop that. But once you in your environment that you decide to like use it more in depth, put it into a product roadmap, whatever it is, that's when you really should step back and take a hard pause and
mm,
say, hmm, now we need to think about this thing a little bit differently.
yeah,
And those are the conversations that I have with consortium members all the time at OISF. I think that's why we've been so successful is that we're not a barrier to their progress, but what we
Mm,
want to do is make sure that Suricata stays around to serve them
yeah.
longer. Um, and if you can't have that conversation with a project because it doesn't exist or you can't find it, then just recognize the risk that you're taking.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the other maybe perceived challenge is that how far down the rabbit hole do you go? In terms of, okay, there is your own direct consumption of open source software for something you're building, but then if you are licensing something from a third party vendor, their use of open source, and if they're
Right.
licensing something else, and so on, like how far down that path do you go to get to the, I guess, like to that sort of undivisible quanta that everything sort of sits on top of.
That's the challenge. And that's why, well, my family's kind of squashed this idea, but I was like, oh, I want to go get a law degree because I want to understand like the legal components to all
Yeah,
this
yeah.
because it would be super fascinating to be able to answer that question. I think where we are today is that we don't know a lot of what we
Mm,
don't know yet. And for projects that have, again, some structure and some organization around it, we think about it. But even at OISF, our consortium members are coming to us with some of these complex down the line questions
yeah,
around licensing. And we're scratching our heads saying, how is that going to work? Is that a us problem or is that a you problem?
yeah.
So it's really, really challenging, but it also makes it kind of exciting.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Absolutely, because I think it's really interesting when we look, particularly now, um, sort of various verticals globally, the regulators are starting to issue sort of operational resilience type regulations, and in that, a key part of it is knowing sort of your critical technology service providers, right? Typically, I mean, usually who they mean is the hyperscalers predominantly, and the sort
right.
of the key sort of IT outsourcing partners. But you could also quite easily extend that to saying, okay, well, hey, we depend on this open source project, right? It's fundamental to this like critical application. Um,
Uh, uh,
hey, okay, okay, no problem. Um, let me go back. Okay, um,
Hyperscalers.
hyperscalers. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to connect it back so that we can edit it properly. Um, so so I think a key part of this. Sorry, let me start again. Um, so as I'm sure you're aware, like various regulatory bodies globally are starting to issue more and more regulations around operational resilience. And as part of this, they speak about managing sort of that third party risk and sort of third party service providers, often like largely sort of aimed at hyperscalers and like critical sort of IT service providers. But you can see a scenario where as an organization, you've built an application that is heavily dependent on an open source project. Um, and if that open source project, for whatever happens with it, right, um, it compromises the resiliency of this application, then that's sort of like, how does that then manifest itself into how you unwind? And I guess ultimately it's about who do you point the finger to?
Right. Well, and if you can unwind it.
Yeah.
But that's where better practices in that development cycle need to also play a part. Um, and I think that's one of the challenges. We see it with Suricata. It's like we want people to be using it. We want people to be
Mm,
testing it and putting it into different scenarios. Um, but we recognize that if you are part of a large enterprise organization, that you're going to have to ask. You
yeah.
can't just kind of take it off into the corner and play around with it. So I think for a lot of the users, they're really going to struggle with that. But that's where I'm trying to stay on the side of positivity because I think some open source projects are really scared that we're going to lose the essence of community and innovation and
Mm,
freedom that is built into these projects and these the software. I want to believe that we can get creative and that we're not going to lose that,
yeah.
that we can have a balance of both some way. But I don't think it's going to be easy. And again, we're going to have to work together to think through it. When the National Cyber Defense Office from the White House put out the call for information around securing open source software, I I went out of my comfort zone and I did a response to it because I saw what they were thinking about. I'm like, you're missing all these other pieces, guys. How do we like look at all the components of what open
Yeah.
source is instead of just securing the software? Absolutely,
Hmm.
200%. I agree with it. That's not the only thing. So we have to bring in expertise from all those different levels, which
Yeah.
brings me to one quick note that, I think often in the security space, we have this divide of technical versus not technical. And if we can break down that divide, then we bring more people to the table to have better conversations around these problems.
Yeah.
Because if if people say, "Oh, yeah, you're not technical because you're not working on development every single day, you're not as important or you don't know
Mm.
as much," we are doing ourselves a disservice, particularly around
Absolutely.
open source.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up because I'm gonna add something to that. You spoke about needing a really diverse range of opinions and creativity to solve this problem, in addition to having both technical and non-technical individuals. And I think that at cyber, I mean, not just cyber, but what we're talking about cyber here, really needs to sort of rethink it's sort of like about how it approaches making it a much more diverse and inclusive um, profession, right?
Yeah,
There is so many amazing individuals, but we're still very, very focused on a very particular profile that work in cyber. So I agree, right? I think there's massive opportunity, a massive amount of skill sets and expertise that we need to bring, and only by further pushing sort of for diversity and equity and inclusion is how it's gonna manifest itself.
yeah. I remember early in my days in the security space, people would want to put definitions around privacy, right?
Hmm.
Similar to the technical versus non-technical. And I would push back in a respectful way, and I would say, the way I view privacy is very different than you.
Hmm.
I come from a different background, I have different
Yeah.
experiences, and I don't think that I will ever be able to use technology the same way as I did before that event in my life. So my definition of privacy is going to be different. This is the
Hmm.
same thing. We're trying to define what is technical. I ask people, and again, it's not to be obnoxious, it's because I'm curious.
Yeah.
When someone says to me, "Well, you're not technical," or "that person's technical," I always ask, "What does that mean?
Yeah.
Can you describe it for me?"
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm curious about how do we shift the conversation, but it
Yeah.
comes first with saying, "I don't understand." Because I can calculate an elliptic curve. That's not what I'm ever going to do again. So don't even ask. But I can. Will I? No. I can code. Will I? No.
Yeah.
I mean, my team at OISF is dying for me to have a pull request on Suricata. I'm like, yeah, just wait, you guys. But my passion and my love is all this other stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to sit where it's fun for me.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I'm not of value to the conversation. And that's where I pull out the Dr. Masada.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that I think there you really kind of wrapped up this entire conversation that we've been having today, which is very much around we can only serve our customers, our clients, our partners best if we, when I say we, I mean whether it's individually or the team that we have working with us, have the ability to understand what we're trying to solve for and why.
Yep.
And that can only happen by listening, but also by having those in our in our team who are able to relate to those experiences, which is
Right.
why being having a sort of a spectrum of of backgrounds of individuals is so important for us to make progress in cyber.
I agree. I agree. And, kind of going back full circle from my world, people used to say to me, why don't you go after that individual? Like, go do that. Why did you go get PhD? And I kept saying, I don't know if I can ever change that.
Mm,
You can't change people. I can't affect change on that. But I can affect change in the way I think, in the way I understand how things work, in the way I can approach my use of these technologies, and how I can protect myself as a result of that knowledge. That's where the control and change and impact happens,
mm.
not in trying to change some awful situation over here. So for me, it's like, how do we make things better by having those broader conversations and coming at it with, again, some humility?
Absolutely. Dr. Misata, Kelley, I couldn't think of a better way to bring this conversation to an end. Sadly, I must add, I'd love to just carry on talking and talking, but I'm conscious of your time, and I'm also conscious that the longer we speak for, the more sort of editing Mindy will need to do. So, with that, thank you so much for your wisdom, for your humility, for your experience, and the perspective that you bring to the two very important problems that you've kind of made your mission to help progress. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Likewise.